Hey guys, what is going on? So I just wanted to discuss a topic that is very important, I think, and a lot of people kind of overlook it because it is a relatively basic concept and people understand this concept, but then over time they kind of lose sight of this and they kind of, when it's mentioned to them, they kind of push back because they already know this. But it's a real problem that I see. And, what's sparking this for me to make this video is because a lot of people ask me, can I cut on testosterone? Can I cut on ecdysterone? And I always answer like, yeah, you can, and it will be beneficial assuming you respond to those compounds. But being in the most anabolic environment possible is going to give you the best results. And a lot of people are concerned about the cost of these supplements. They don't want to be wasteful. And there's nothing more wasteful than going from a potential anabolic environment to a catabolic environment and then trying to build a muscle and, spend money on this compound. I think that is a wasteful thing. So I'm not saying that you can't cut on it. I have cut on it. Other people have had success. That's not what I'm saying. It's just that to maximize your results, doing anything, whether you're taking testosterone or ecdysterone or you're just a normal person who's, doing normal workouts, it doesn't matter. You are going to maximize your results in terms of gaining size and strength on a calorie surplus. And this is a very basic concept that I understand, that you guys understand, but I kind of want to give some examples in terms of myself and just kind of the general way that it goes to kind of paint a picture as to how this kind of, your judgment gets clouded over time as you kind of practice this. So when you are a new lifter, I'm going to exclude the people who are like skinny fat and they constantly go through this cycle where they never really make progress because they're too obsessed with like losing weight. Okay. I'm going to assume most people who are watching this video have been lifting for a decent amount of time, have made progress, understand that a calorie surplus is important. But, a lot of you guys have kind of gotten to that point where the ROI is not that favorable, and therefore bulking seems less attractive because the amount of tissue that you can actually put on during any given time is already pretty slow, and I think people understand that over time, but it just gets worse over time because of the law of diminishing returns. So essentially, think of an example like this. Let's say you're a new lifter and you spend a year and you're in a calorie surplus for a lot of it and you see really good results. So you associate food with higher strength, more muscle mass. It's a very good thing. Every year that you continue to practice this, you want to build muscle, add strength, you are in a calorie surplus. But every single year, your ability to put on muscle will diminish over time. The law of diminishing returns. You eventually will get to a point where you're barely even putting on muscle. Okay, so it gets harder and harder and harder. So your basically your tangible results become less impressive, and therefore you start to see it as kind of this thing that might not be worth it, right? So for example, let's say, and I'm just pulling these numbers out of nowhere, but let's say you add 20 pounds in a bulk and 10 of it is lean mass and 10 of it is fat mass. Well, that's a pretty favorable ratio. You added 10 pounds of lean mass, gained 20 pounds overall, you're looking bigger. Yeah, you're not really quite as lean at that point, but you've added quite a bit of muscle, so you look pretty good, right? That's a very good ROI when, half the weight that you're putting on is good weight and only half is bad weight, right? Now let's imagine another year you do the same thing and the ratio gets less favorable. Let's say you put on 8 pounds of lean mass. When I say lean mass, I'm not saying muscle. I'm just saying lean mass is anything that is not fat, right? So let's say that ratio changes and you get 8 pounds of lean mass and 12 pounds of fat. So you're adding, 2 more pounds of fat and you're gaining 2 less pounds of lean mass. So it's less ideal. And as time goes on, that continues to be the case more and more until you get to the point where let's say you add 20 pounds over the course of a bulk and 2 pounds is lean mass and 18 pounds is fat mass. Well, it's understandable why a lot of people get to this point and they're like, this sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. And they get into this cycle where they add more fat than they want to. And they get in this constant cycle of always kind of basically being dissatisfied with their body and having a eating disorder and always want to lose more. And I'm not saying that people get to that point where they're literally adding only 2 pounds of lean mass. I think a lot of people probably end up, perceiving this as a negative thing far before that. So I'll give myself as an example. When I was growing up, I always just knew that adding food and adding protein was going to be beneficial for building muscle and getting bigger. Now, I wasn't a bodybuilder. I was just trying to get bigger, faster, stronger for sports. That was the way that I looked at it. So I always saw food as something that was beneficial for my goals. I had no body dysmorphia or anything like that. I never really cared how I looked. It was just, hey, can I get bigger? And I wasn't, obese at the time or anything like that. I was just trying to eat as much food as I could as a skinny kid. And it worked. I added muscle and I basically ate as much as I could. That was basically my philosophy for all of my teenage years, right? And I always thought of adding food, having better recovery, all these things as being beneficial, right? And it had always been the case up to that point, even when my results started to slow. So when I went ahead and I did a dirty bulk not too long ago, my first kind of dirty bulk where I was excessively just trying to add a lot of weight, because I had always associated adding size overall, fat, muscle, whatever, as being beneficial, right? So adding a lot of calories and actually dirty bulking, as opposed to just like always, I guess before I was like in a perma bulk, whereas this time I was dirty bulking and actually intentionally trying to gain a certain amount of weight. And I was really focused on the scale as opposed to just like making progress. I really want to see that scale move. And I was like, I'm not eating enough. And I kept eating and eating and eating. And I got the fattest I'd ever been. Still to this day, that's the fattest I've ever been. And it kind of scarred me because I never wanted to be that fat. I didn't really perceive that I'd made all that much progress. And I thought, this isn't really worth it. I was basically just adding fat. I did this thing in such a short period of time because I basically had reinforced that idea in my head that calories equals size equals strength is good, right? So it basically meant more calories equals more good. And I think a lot of people who are smart eventually will fall into this trap and they'll dirty bulk and they'll do these things, but they do it over such a short period of time, right? So you can literally get fat, but do it over the course of like a year, and you can accumulate a lot of muscle mass in that process. And yeah, you're going to have to cut the fat eventually, but it's not to say that getting the 20% body fat is the end of the world. And that's the situation that I got myself in. But I accumulated that fat mass so quickly that the rate of muscle mass that I could have achieved in that time period, you can't possibly make all that much progress. The thing is, though, I did make progress, and I've looked back in hindsight, and all the times that I've seen significant progress in terms of gaining size and strength have realistically all been in a calorie surplus. And I kind of was in that philosophy after that, I would say, failed dirty bulk, even though I did gain muscle, was that, I don't want to be in this dirty bulk. I don't want to be in this massive surplus anymore. And so I kind of villainized a calorie surplus, and I realized that I could build strength and still make progress in a cut, by having certain factors kind of controlled for and not being stupid about it. And I was like, okay, this is the way. I'm just going to be around this weight. I'm not going to try and like bulk up again, anything excessive. And I basically, from that point on, stopped making really good progress, to be honest, because I was not in the most anabolic environment possible. And I was later in my training career to the point where my results were really diminishing. So I was not only kind of plateauing from being not in a calorie surplus, but I was putting myself in either a kind of neutral environment or potentially a catabolic environment if I was in a cut at any given time. So I really wasn't utilizing everything that I could have to have been making the progress that I realistically could have at that point. So I really felt kind of plateaued, like I was spinning my wheels. And I think this happens to a lot of people, right? So I think the solution to this is not treating like more food equals better necessarily, and not think that you can gain these ridiculous amounts of muscle in a short period of time, because I think a lot of people kind of do that. But instead, see a calorie surplus as a slow and steady process where you just want to be in a calorie surplus for as long as possible. And this is not to say that you get on a 50 calorie surplus, which is just so minimal that I don't think it's very effective, and just do that forever. I'm not saying that. I'm saying be in more of a moderate surplus. Try not to gain 2 pounds of fat every week, right? Dial it back a little bit and just try and prolong that for as long as you can, because ultimately you can only gain muscle so fast. And you want to be in a calorie surplus for the majority of the year because you want to maximize your results. If you're bulking, if you do a dirty bulk for 3 months and then you cut for like 5 months trying to get rid of all that fat, and then your metabolism is crashed and you maintain at a level that you're not comfortable at, you're spending more of your year in a catabolic environment than you are in an anabolic environment. And then you are in a situation where you can't eat very much food. You're not happy with that. You're not making the results that you could because you're not in a surplus. It's just a bad situation that I see so many people get into, and they just keep spinning their wheels, and they basically have a premature plateau. And it basically all boils down to, you have to know that it's going to get harder over time. It's not going to get easier. Your results are going to kind of fade, and you're going to not be able to see that same rate of progress. In fact, it should diminish realistically every year. It's going to get harder and harder and harder. And that's a very kind of bleak thing, but at the end of the day, you are going to see diminishing returns. That's how it applies to your gains. You can't just infinitely gain 5-10 pounds, whatever it is, of muscle every single year. That's just not going to happen, guys. So understanding that, knowing what you're getting yourself into, going into a bulk with a realistic expectation that you're not going to gain 10 pounds of muscle in this bulk, but you might gain 2 or 3, and you're not going to gain 2 or 3 if you dirty bulk for 2 months. You're going to gain 2 or 3 over the course of several months, right? And obviously this depends on how advanced you are, but you just want to be in an anabolic environment for as long as possible. And then when it comes to cutting, I have my own opinions on that, but I don't think that we should try and be in a catabolic environment for an excessively long period of time. And I think that's what Instagram models encourage when they're on their page, and you're perceiving them to be shredded year round, when realistically they probably aren't even shredded year round. They're probably taking mass amounts of pictures, posting them throughout the year, being strategic with it, as well as that's literally their job. A lot of them are on gear. A lot of them are not making the progress that they could be because they realize that the money is made by looking good. And so people look up to these people who have already put on the muscle. So I see it as a big issue that I run into so frequently. And I think we need to think of it as a way of, being slow and steady, and not just letting one dirty bulk where we were kind of, unfortunately not great with our calories. We can't let that stop us from ever bulking again and missing out on potential gains. And we just have to look at it from a more realistic scope and be like, hey, I'm not going to gain muscle as fast as I used to. I'm not going to gain muscle at the rate that these guys are saying that you can gain muscle. A lot of them are genetically gifted, on gear, maybe both. Right? And so it's just not going to be the same, guys. And I think it's so tragic that we have gotten to this point where people just aren't making results simply because they feel insecure, because they're comparing themselves to these Instagram models, and they have unrealistic expectations about the type of progress they can make in a short period of time. And I just think that is very unfortunate. And this is coming from somebody who doesn't even make crazy progress in a bulk. I realistically, am not a super good responder to excessive calories. Like, being in calorie surplus doesn't increase my performance as much as it does for other people, but it still does increase it to some extent. And when I cut calories, my performance doesn't fall off a cliff either. I actually can kind of maintain a pretty good level of performance, whether I'm in maintenance, a cut, or a bulk. But I know even for me that being in a bulk is going to put me in the most anabolic environment possible. So this is coming from somebody who, again, struggled with this themselves, and I've kind of seen the light. And now that I'm in a calorie surplus, I think I'm making really good gains again that I was basically depriving myself of before because I was unwilling to be in that calorie surplus. So just wanted to kind of shed some light on that, remind you that a calorie surplus is important, and don't try and rush that process of trying to gain all this muscle in 2 months, right? Because that's where people, have things go south, and they start getting into this place where they spin their wheels and they're never satisfied with their body and they're not making progress. And it's just not a situation you want to be in. So anyway, that's all I got to say about that. I will keep you updated, and I'll talk to you soon.